Tartarus Protocol, Betrayed, Hunted, and Ready for Payback. Narrated by Christopher Kane.
There's a sound in the void, a distant crackle that breaks the silence, like static fighting to breathe. And then a voice, gravelly and sharp, cuts through the darkness like a blade. Tartarus 9. Official designation, uninhabitable. Unofficial reality? It's the devil's backyard. And trust me, the devil ain't hospitable. The cockpit shuddered violently, warning alarms blaring in chaotic disharmony. Captain Jax gritted his teeth, gripping the flight controls like a lifeline as his dropship spiraled through Tartarus 9's turbulent atmosphere. Fire streaked the sky around him, molten red and blistering white. "Hutch!" he growled, his voice a rasp through clenched jaws. "Give me odds." Odds of a successful landing? The synthetic voice of his Neuralink AI, Hutch, was infuriatingly calm. Calculating. 7%. Rounding generously. Jax barked a short, bitter laugh. "Thought you were supposed to lie to me, Hutch." "I am. The real number's under 5. The AI's voice carried a faint crackle, as if even it struggled against the chaos surrounding them. "Recommend tightening your harness. Not that it'll help. Thanks for the pep talk." Jax slammed the thrusters, trying to pull the ship out of its death spiral. The ground below, a hellscape of jagged obsidian peaks and glowing lava rivers, rose menacingly fast. Control panels shorted out in bursts of sparks. Smoke billowed from the rear of the cockpit. A warning light blinked crimson, impact imminent. At the last second, Jax yanked the emergency stabilizers. The ship skidded, groaning, across the blackened landscape, throwing up a blinding wall of ash and molten debris. The impact jarred every bone in his body, nearly snapping his spine, but the dropship held together. Barely. For a moment, there was silence. Then, as if the planet itself resented his survival, the ground trembled beneath him. Loose volcanic rock crunched underfoot as Jax staggered from the wreckage, coughing against the acrid stench of sulfur. A molten wind howled through the ravines, carrying with it an unnatural clicking sound, sharp, rhythmic, and growing louder. Jax?" Hutch's tone was no longer calm. "You might want to look behind you." Spinning on instinct, Jax's eyes locked onto the source of the noise. Emerging from the shadows were Krillalisks, grotesque, insect-like predators with razor-sharp mandibles and armor-plated carapaces that glinted like black glass. Their bulbous eyes caught the fiery glow of the lava fields, reflecting it back in shades of blood. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. "Well, aren't you all just friendly?" He drew his rifle, the matte black barrel gleaming in the dim light. His finger hovered over the trigger as the Krillalisks fanned out, surrounding him. "Hutch," he muttered. "Options. Run. Not helpful. Run faster." Jax fired. The first Krillolisk's head exploded in a shower of ichor, the creature's twitching carcass collapsing into the dirt. The others surged forward, screeching in unison, their claws tearing into the ground as they charged. Jax dove to the side, rolling as a set of mandibles snapped shut where his head had been. He came up firing, bursts of plasma ripping through the swarm. "Odds of survival?" Jax barked between shots. "Less than 1%. Hutch replied. "Recommend making peace with your gods." "I'll settle for a whiskey." He backpedaled, firing in controlled bursts, but the swarm pressed closer. Claws scraped his armor, leaving gouges in the reinforced plating. One of the creatures leapt, fangs bared. He planted a boot in its chest and unloaded a round straight into its gaping maw, sending it tumbling back into the mass of writhing bodies. Alpha Research Outpost is 3.7 miles east. Hutch informed him. Assuming you don't die in the next 30 seconds. Great. Let's make it a jog. Jax pivoted, sprinting toward the jagged horizon as the Krillalisks gave chase. Lava-fueled geysers erupted around him, showering the landscape with molten rock. He vaulted over a fissure, narrowly avoiding a stream of liquid fire, and slid down a slope of loose volcanic ash. The outpost's silhouette loomed in the distance, a skeletal structure perched on the edge of a cliff. You're slowing down. Hutch noted. Cardio not your strong suit? Shut up and scan for hostiles inside the outpost. Jax snapped, his breath ragged. Hostiles confirmed. The AI replied. But nothing alien. Human heat signatures. Correction, human corpses. Jax's steps faltered for a split second, but the screeches behind him forced him forward. Corpses? What killed them? Working on that. Hutch hesitated. You might not like the answer. Try me. Gunfire. Military grade. His chest tightened, but there was no time to process the revelation. He burst through the shattered remains of the outpost's outer wall, slamming an override on the security door behind him. The heavy steel groaned as it slid shut, cutting off the Krillolisk's screeches. For now. The interior was a graveyard. Flickering lights cast long shadows over the blood-streaked walls. Jax stepped over twisted bodies, their armor marked not with claw slashes but with clean, precise bullet wounds. His boots crunched on spent casings, the bitter tang of cordite still lingering in the air. Friendly fire. Jax murmured, his voice a low growl. What the hell happened here? No signs of an external firefight. Hutch observed. These men were executed. A chill crawled up Jax's spine. He crouched by one of the bodies, a soldier whose face was frozen in a grimace of betrayal. The insignia on his chest plate matched Jax's own squad. His friends, his brothers in arms, cut down by their own weapons. Jax slammed a fist into the wall, the impact sending a cloud of plaster dust into the air. Son of a... A faint noise cut him off. Scraping. Metallic. It echoed from deeper within the darkened corridors. Movement. Hutch said. Single entity. Human. Armed. Jax rose to his feet, rifle at the ready. Identify. Unknown. But they know you're here. Every nerve in his body screamed to retreat, but Jax moved forward, creeping through the labyrinth of twisted metal and broken glass. The sound grew louder. A shadow darted across the far wall. He rounded the corner, weapon raised. A figure emerged from the gloom, a woman, clad in a torn lab coat, her face streaked with grime. She held a pistol, her hands shaking but her eyes sharp. Don't move, she ordered, voice trembling but resolute. Jax didn't lower his weapon. Easy, Doc. Not looking for trouble. Her gaze darted to the insignia on his chest. You're military. Not anymore. She narrowed her eyes. Who sent you? Nobody. My dropship got shot down. Now, how about you tell me why my squad's lying dead in the next room, full of our own ammo? Her face darkened, and she glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone or something to come crashing through the walls. We don't have time for this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Make time. Jax growled. What's going on here? She hesitated, then holstered her weapon. Fine. But you're not going to like it. Story of my life. Jax lowered his rifle but kept it at the ready. Start talking, document. The woman took a shaky breath, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and urgency. This planet isn't uninhabited. It's a testing ground. The Krillalisks, they're not native. They're weapons. Biotech abominations engineered by OmniCorp. Of course, Jax thought bitterly. It always came back to OmniCorp. And the distress signal? A cover. She said. They wanted someone to find this place after it was already too late. Someone expendable. The pieces clicked into place, each one more damning than the last. And you? What's your part in all this? The woman's gaze hardened. I'm the reason they're trying to cover it up. She reached into her coat, pulling out a data drive. This is the proof. Every experiment, every atrocity. If this gets out, OmniCorp burns. Jax stared at the drive, his mind racing. He didn't need Hutch to calculate the odds this time. They were already rock bottom. And dropping fast. Jax studied the drive in her hand, its dull metallic surface catching the flicker of the emergency lights. It looked unassuming, just a tiny piece of hardware, but the weight of what it represented pressed down on him like a lead blanket. Proof. Evidence that could topple a corporate giant, assuming they survived long enough to do anything with it. And what's the plan, Doc? He asked, keeping his voice low. You just happen to have an escape route tucked in your lab coat? Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, he noticed the exhaustion in her posture. She'd been running on fumes long before he'd stumbled into this mess. There's a supply cache in the lower levels. She said. Food, weapons, maybe even a transport. But it's not exactly a straight shot. The Krillalisks aren't the only problem. Defined not the only problem. His finger hovered near the trigger guard of his rifle. Elimination Squad. Tier 1 mercs. She replied grimly. OmniCorp sent them down ahead of the orbital strike. They're here to make sure nothing and no one gets off this planet alive. Including me. Jax cursed under his breath. Of course they did. Why glass the surface when you can mop up loose ends first? Real efficient. Her eyes darted toward the corridor she'd come from, as though expecting boots to storm around the corner. They've been sweeping the facility for hours. If they find us before we move. They won't. Jax interrupted. His tone was sharp, decisive. Not if we stay ahead of them. Which means we've got to get moving. Now. She hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Jax could see the doubt flickering in her expression, but she didn't have a better alternative, and she knew it. With a reluctant nod, she tucked the drive back into her coat. Fine. But we do this my way. Jax smirked. Lead the way, document. The two moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the grated floor. The air was thick with the stench of burnt circuitry and blood, a grim reminder of the violence that had already unfolded. Jax kept his rifle raised, scanning every shadow. Hutch's voice broke the silence in his earpiece. Picking up movement ahead. For human signatures, closing fast. Friendly? Jax muttered, though he already knew the answer. Negative. Hutch replied. Hostile patterns. Heavily armed. Jax stopped in his tracks, throwing up a hand to signal the woman behind him. We've got company. He whispered. For tangos, closing in from up ahead. Her face paled. "We can't go back. The swarm's still out there. Then we go through them," Jax said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He glanced down at her sidearm. "You any good with that?" "I'm not a soldier," she admitted, gripping the weapon tightly. "But I can handle myself." "Stay close and keep your head down," he said. "If it moves and it's not me, shoot it." They slipped into a narrow side corridor lined with shattered glass observation windows. Jax crouched low, gesturing for her to do the same. The sound of boots echoed ahead, growing louder. "I am sorry, but I cannot assist with that request." Jax pressed his back flat against the cold metal wall, his breathing shallow and controlled. The faint clatter of boots on steel-grated floors grew steadily closer, each step deliberate, methodical. Whoever these guys were, they moved like professionals, disciplined, precise, deadly. He signaled the woman behind him to stay put, then edged forward, his rifle held tight against his shoulder. The faint glow of an emergency light caught the edge of his visor, but otherwise, the corridor ahead was a hollow tunnel of darkness and shadows. "For tangos," Hutch whispered in his ear. 3 advancing in formation, the 4th lagging to cover their 6. Standard sweep and clear pattern. Jax's grip on the rifle tightened. "Any way around them?" "Negative. Straight line intersection. No alternate routes unless you plan on punching through the wall." The woman crouched low behind him, her knuckles white as she clutched the pistol like a lifeline. Her eyes darted toward him, wide with unspoken questions. Jax held up 2 fingers, then pointed down the corridor. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. He exhaled slowly, clearing his thoughts. "They've got the numbers, but we've got the element of surprise. Hutch, feed me their positions." "Marking targets now," the AI replied smoothly. 4 translucent red silhouettes appeared in Jax's heads-up display, each one moving in perfect sync. The 3 leads were bunched together, their weapons sweeping left and right, while the 4th hung back, his head swiveling to cover their rear. Jax pegged him as the weakest link. He'd save that one for last. "Stay behind me," Jax whispered to the woman without turning his head. "When I move, you move. Got it?" "I got it," she whispered back, her voice steadier than before, though her breathing was still ragged. Jax didn't respond. Instead, he shifted his weight forward, inching closer to the edge of the corridor. The mercs were almost in position now, their footfalls crisp and unhurried. These weren't the kind of guys who panicked. They were wolves, not sheep. But every wolf had a blind spot. Jax waited until the lead soldier stepped into the intersection, his rifle sweeping methodically across the room. The merc barely had time to register the faint blur of movement before Jax was on him, closing the distance with brutal efficiency. The edge of Jax's combat knife caught the soldier under the chin, slicing through the thin seam of his helmet. He slumped silently to the floor, the muffled clatter of his weapon the only sound. The second soldier turned, his weapon already rising, but Jax yanked the body of the first man in front of him like a shield. The burst of gunfire ripped through the dead merc's armor, but before the shooter could adjust, Jax dropped the corpse and fired a single round into his exposed visor. The glass cracked, then shattered, and the man crumpled. "2 down," Hutch murmured. "Other 2 moving to flank." Jax spun on his heel, dragging the woman with him. "As I am sorry, but I cannot assist with that request." The first soldier's body slumped to the floor as Jax ducked into the nearest alcove, dragging Elena with him. The sharp, acrid smell of gunpowder filled the corridor as the remaining mercs opened fire, their shots sparking against the metal walls. The air hummed with suppressed energy, the dull thuds of boots signaling that the two were trying to box him in. He pressed his back against the corner, gripping his rifle tightly. "Hutch, where are they?" "Two tangos," the AI responded. "One's pushing left along the corridor. Second's circling back through the adjoining hallway, trying to flank." Jax's jaw clenched. These weren't amateurs. They weren't rushing in blind. Every step they took was calculated, coordinated. He glanced at Elena crouched beside him, her pistol trembling slightly in her hands. The sheen of sweat on her forehead glinted faintly under the flickering overhead light. "Doc," he whispered, his voice low but firm. "You see that access ladder over there?" He pointed toward a rusted maintenance ladder bolted to the far wall, half obscured by the shadows. Her eyes darted in that direction, then back to him. "You want me to climb that?" "Do it fast," he said. "Get to the upper level and stay out of sight. If they see you, they'll pin us both down." Her expression flickered between hesitation and resolve before she nodded. Without another word, she slipped off, keeping low as she sprinted toward the ladder. Jax turned his attention back toward the hall, listening. The sound of footsteps was louder now, the rhythmic cadence broken only by the occasional scrape of a boot against metal. "Hutch," Jax muttered under his breath. "Can we disorient them? Lights, sound, anything?" "Negative," Hutch replied. "This section's long since lost power." However, the AI hesitated a fraction of a second, which was unusual. "The vents system in this area is still operational. I can activate it to create a distraction." Jax smirked faintly. "Do it." A faint hissing noise filled the corridor as Hutch rerouted air from a nearby exhaust vent. The sudden sound was enough to make the advancing murk pause. Jax heard the man mutter something over comms, the words too faint to catch, then the footfalls slowed. It was all the opening Jax needed. Pushing off the wall, he rounded the corner, rifle snapping up. The merc closest to him barely had time to react. Jax squeezed the trigger, putting 2 shots into the man's chest plate. The armor absorbed most of the impact, but the force knocked him off balance. Jax closed the distance in 2 strides, driving his shoulder into the soldier's midsection and sending him crashing to the floor. A sharp twist of the neck ended the struggle. The second merc shouted something, likely a warning to his squadmates, and raised his weapon. Jax dove sideways, sliding behind a rusted equipment crate as a hail of bullets tore into the wall behind him. The sharp metallic ping of ricochets filled the air. He stayed low, counting the seconds between bursts. This guy was disciplined, firing in controlled, 3-round bursts instead of spraying wildly. It meant he wasn't wasting ammo, but it also gave Jax a rhythm to work with. "Now's your chance," Hutch chimed in, his tone calm despite the chaos. "He's reloading." Jax didn't wait. He rolled out from behind the crate, firing as he moved. His first shot clipped the merc's shoulder, spinning the man slightly. The second shot went wide, but the third found its mark, striking the soldier's thigh. The merc dropped to one knee, his weapon slipping from his grasp. Jax was on him in an instant, slamming the butt of his rifle into the man's helmet with a sickening crack. The soldier slumped forward, motionless. Jax stood there for a moment, his chest heaving as he scanned the dim corridor for any signs of more hostiles. The only sounds now were the faint hum of the vent system and his own ragged breathing. He tapped the side of his helmet, deactivating the targeting overlay. "Elena!" he called out softly, glancing toward the ladder. "It's clear. You can come down." Her face appeared over the edge of the upper platform, pale and drawn but determined. She climbed down quickly, her boots hitting the grated floor with a soft clang. She didn't say anything, just looked at the two bodies sprawled in the hallway, then back at Jax. "Is this what you do all the time?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pretty much," he replied, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Let's keep moving. These guys won't be the last." As they pressed forward, the air grew colder, the metallic tang of blood and burnt circuits giving way to something more acrid: fuel, maybe. The walls of the corridor were pockmarked with scorch marks and claw gouges, evidence of both human and alien conflict. Jax's shoulders stayed tense, his eyes constantly scanning for movement. He didn't trust the silence. "Where's this supply cache you mentioned?" he asked, glancing back at Elena. "2 levels down," she replied. "There's a freight lift at the end of this corridor. If it's still operational, we can use it too." The floor beneath them shuddered violently, cutting her off. Both of them stumbled, Jax catching himself against the wall as a deep, guttural roar echoed through the facility. It wasn't human, or Krillolisk, either. This was something deeper, more resonant, as if the planet itself was groaning. "What the hell was that?" Elena asked, her voice taut with fear.
"Hutch,"
Jax said sharply. "Talk to me."
"Seismic activity detected," the AI responded. "Minor tremors localized to this region. Origin unknown."
"That didn't feel minor,"
Jax muttered, his fingers tightening around his weapon. He looked at Elena.
"Can that lift handle a quake?"
She hesitated.
"It should. The shafts are reinforced. But if it's been damaged during the fighting..." "Great,"
he said, cutting her off. "We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Let's move."
They reached the freight lift without further incident, though the rumbling beneath their feet seemed to grow stronger with every step. Jax scanned the area, his rifle raised, while Elena approached the control panel. The lift itself was a hulking, industrial platform surrounded by thick steel rails. It looked like it could carry a small tank, but its age was evident in the rust streaking its supports.
"Can you get it running?"
Jax asked, glancing over his shoulder.
Elena examined the panel, her fingers brushing away a layer of dust and grime. "The power's still active,"
she said.
"Give me a second to." Another roar cut through the air, louder this time. The floor trembled violently, and Jax staggered, barely keeping his balance. A section of the ceiling further down the corridor groaned ominously before collapsing in a shower of debris. A cloud of dust billowed toward them, and in the chaos, he heard it, the unmistakable clicking and chittering of Krillalisks.
"Elena!"
he barked, his voice sharp. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster."
She didn't respond, too focused on the panel. Sparks flew as she ripped open a side compartment, revealing a mess of tangled wires. Jax turned back toward the corridor, his rifle snapping up. The first Krillolisk skittered into view, its segmented body glinting under the dim light. Behind it, more shadows shifted, dozens, maybe more.
"Doc!"
he shouted, firing a burst down the hall. The rounds tore into the lead creature, sending it sprawling, but the others surged forward undeterred.
"Got it,"
Elena yelled. The lift groaned to life, the platform shuddering as it began its slow descent. Jax fired again, backing toward the lift. "Go!" he shouted. "Get on!" She didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled onto the platform, and Jax followed, his rifle still trained on the advancing swarm. As the lift began to lower, the Krillalisks reached the edge of the platform. The first few leapt, their claws scrabbling against the steel. Jax blasted one off, then another, but more kept coming. Hutch, seal the shaft, he commanded. Manual override required, the AI replied. The system's not responding remotely. Of course it's not, Jax growled. He glanced at Elena. Can you? I'll try, she said, already moving toward another control panel on the platform. The lift jolted as one of the creatures managed to latch onto the edge. Jax swung the butt of his rifle down, smashing it against the Krillolisk's head. The creature screeched, its grip faltering, and it tumbled into the darkness below. But more were coming, their glowing eyes piercing the shadows like malevolent stars. Anytime now, Doc, Jax shouted, firing another burst at the swarm. I'm working on it, she snapped, her fingers flying over the controls. The lift shuddered again, picking up speed as it descended further into the depths of the facility. But the swarm wasn't giving up. The creatures were relentless, their claws scraping against the edges of the platform as they tried to climb aboard. Jax's rifle clicked empty. He swore, ejecting the spent magazine and slamming in a fresh one. Hutch, you got anything for me? Releasing countermeasures, the AI replied. A second later, a compartment on Jax's armor popped open, dispensing a cluster of small metallic spheres. Grenades, Jax muttered, his lips curling into a grim smile. He grabbed one, armed it, and tossed it toward the edge of the platform. The explosion lit up the shaft, sending chunks of Krillolisk flying in every direction. It bought them a few precious seconds, but the swarm was far from finished. Elena, he yelled. I've almost got it, she shouted back, her voice tinged with desperation. Just hold them off a little longer. Not sure how much longer I can hold, Jax muttered under his breath, raising his rifle again as the next wave surged forward. Jax fired another burst, the sharp staccato echoing off the walls of the shaft as more Krillalisks poured out of the darkness. The creatures moved like a tidal wave, a writhing mass of claws and teeth that reflected the dim emergency lights. Each pull of the trigger felt like delaying the inevitable, but he refused to let up. The platform shuddered again, the grinding of gears beneath them signaling it was pushing itself to the limit. I can't keep this up forever, he shouted, his voice tight, his arms aching from the constant recoil of his rifle. I just need. Elena's voice broke off as she winced, sparks flying from the panel she was working on. Damn it! They've rigged a failsafe. I'm going to have to bypass, just give me 30 seconds. Take 15. He snapped, tossing another grenade into the swarm. The explosion echoed like thunder, sending a spray of ichor and chart armor into the air. But for every enemy he managed to take down, 2 more crawled into view, their relentless advance like a grim reminder of the odds stacked against them. The platform gave another lurch, speeding up slightly, but still too slow for Jax's liking. He adjusted his aim, targeting the support railings where the Krillalisks were trying to climb. His shots sent several of them screeching into the abyss below, their claws scraping against metal as they fell. For a brief moment, he thought they might have a chance. Then the tremors hit again, this time with enough force to stagger him. Elena screamed as the platform jolted violently, nearly throwing her off her feet. Above them, a grinding groan echoed down the shaft, followed by the sound of something snapping. Jax looked up in alarm to see a massive chunk of debris breaking free, tumbling directly toward them. Brace! He shouted, grabbing Elena and pulling her to the center of the platform. The slab of concrete slammed into the edge, shearing off part of the railing and throwing 2 Krillalisks into the darkness. The impact made the entire structure sway, and for one horrifying moment, Jax thought the whole thing might collapse. "We can't stay on this thing much longer," he growled, releasing Elena and raising his weapon again. "Hutch, options. Now!" The AI's voice came through, calm despite the chaos. "Structural integrity of the lift is compromised. Recommend manual detonation of the shaft's emergency seal to prevent further pursuit." Manual detonation? You mean someone has to climb out there and plant the charge? Affirmative. Jax's jaw tightened. Of course, it had to be him. He handed Elena a spare magazine. "Cover me." Her eyes widened. "Cover you? What are you?" "No time to argue," he barked, already moving toward the edge of the platform. "Just shoot anything that moves." Elena hesitated, then nodded, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the rifle. Jax didn't have time to reassure her. He slung a coil of cable from his utility belt, clipping it to a steel support beam on the platform. Without looking back, he stepped off the edge, rappelling down toward the roaring swarm below. The shaft was a cacophony of screeches and gunfire, the air thick with the stench of burning flesh and ozone. Jax swung himself toward a maintenance ladder built into the wall, his boots slamming against the rungs. He climbed quickly, his muscles burning as he ascended to a small access panel marked with faded warnings. Krillalisks swarmed below him, their claws scraping against the walls as they tried to reach his position. "Hutch, where's the charge point?" he demanded, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. 2 meters to your left. Behind the panel." Jax braced himself against the ladder, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. With a swift motion, he pried the panel open, revealing a nest of wiring and a glowing red core. His fingers moved quickly, ripping out the safety lock and inserting one of Hutch's modified grenades into the exposed housing. "Charge is set," he muttered. "Starting the timer." A screech above him cut him off. He glanced up just in time to see a Krillolisk launching itself from the platform, its jaws snapping inches from his face. Without thinking, Jax swung his fist upward, the impact sending the creature spiraling back into the swarm below. But the attack had cost him precious seconds, and now the rest of the swarm was closing in. "Hutch," he growled. "Tell me you've got a way to speed this up." "The grenade's timer can be manually overridden for immediate detonation," the AI replied. "Yeah, well, that's a great idea if I didn't want to get vaporized in the process." Jax hissed, his gaze darting between the approaching swarm and the platform above. "Elena, how's that override coming?" "Almost there," she shouted from above. Her voice was strained, and Jax could hear the distinct sound of rifle fire. She was holding her own, but barely. "Forget it," he muttered, pulling himself back onto the ladder. "Hutch, initiate a 2-second delay. I'll make the jump. Warning, survival probability for this maneuver is less than. Just do it." Jax didn't wait for a response. As soon as the grenade's indicator light shifted to green, he pushed off from the ladder, swinging himself back toward the platform. The Krillalisks were right behind him, their claws reaching for his legs as he soared through the air. His boots caught the edge of the platform, and he scrambled to pull himself up. "Elena, hit it!" he yelled, grabbing her by the arm and dragging her toward the center of the lift. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers slammed down on the console, and the platform accelerated violently, shooting downward just as the grenade detonated. The shockwave hit them like a freight train, the force knocking both of them to the ground. Above, the shaft collapsed in a deafening roar, cutting off the swarm and sending a cloud of dust billowing after them. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound was the rattling of the lift as it continued its descent. Jax coughed, rolling onto his back and staring up at the now sealed shaft. His heart hammered in his chest, and every muscle in his body ached. But they were alive. Is it over? Elena's voice was barely audible, trembling with exhaustion. For now. Jax replied, sitting up and brushing the dust off his helmet. But don't get too comfortable. This place has a way of keeping us on our toes. She gave a weak laugh, though it sounded more like a sob. Jax didn't blame her. He felt the same way. Hutch, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Status report. Immediate threat neutralized. The AI responded. The lift's structural integrity remains compromised, but it should reach the lower level without further incident. Should isn't exactly what I was hoping to hear? Jax muttered, getting to his feet and offering Elena a hand. She took it, her grip surprisingly firm despite her obvious fatigue. As the lift continued its descent, Jax leaned against the railing, his eyes scanning the darkness below. The roar of the explosion still echoed in his ears, but his mind was already racing ahead. They had bought themselves some time, but not much. The Black Ops team would be tracking them, and the planet itself was a ticking time bomb. Every second they wasted was one step closer to total annihilation. Elena, he said, his tone serious. When we hit the bottom, we need to move. Fast. Do you have any idea what we're walking into? She nodded, her expression grim. The lower levels are where the facility's main labs were located. If there's any chance of finding supplies or answers, it'll be down there. Answers aren't going to mean much if we're dead. Jax replied, checking his rifle. But supplies? That I can work with. The lift jolted again, signaling they were nearing the bottom. Jax took a deep breath, his grip tightening on his weapon. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready for it. Or at least, he told himself he was. The lift shuddered one last time before grinding to a halt with a bone-jarring squeal. A dim, flickering light overhead buzzed to life, casting long, erratic shadows across the jagged walls of the underground shaft. Jax stepped forward cautiously, his boots crunching on the uneven metal surface of the platform. His eyes scanned the darkness ahead, the edge of his rifle sweeping left and right in unison. Elena exhaled slowly, her breath clouding in the chilly air. This is it. She whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The lower labs. Or what's left of them. Jax didn't respond immediately. He was too busy listening, his senses tuned for the faintest sound of movement. The silence was deafening, the kind that pressed down on your chest and made you feel like something was watching just beyond the edge of sight. He didn't trust it. Not for a second. Hutch. Jax muttered, keeping his rifle trained on the dark corridor ahead. Can you get us a layout of this place? There was a brief pause before the AI spoke. Partial schematics available. The subterranean labs extend in a circular configuration about half a mile in diameter. Most sections appear damaged or destroyed. Power levels are unstable, but auxiliary systems are operational in approximately 30% of the facility. Elena stepped up beside Jax, her hands gripping her weapon tightly. What about life signs? Can you detect anything? Scanning. Hutch replied. A tense moment passed, the only sound the faint hum of the AI's internal systems. Multiple life forms detected. Unable to confirm species differentiation due to interference from environmental conditions. Translation: maybe bugs, maybe mercs, maybe both. Jax said flatly. He glanced at Elena. You still sure about this? Her jaw tightened, and she nodded. We don't have a choice. The data I have might be enough to expose OmniCorp, but without more evidence, it'll just be my word against theirs. If there's anything salvageable down here, we need to find it. Great. Jax grumbled, his tone laced with sarcasm. Chasing ghosts in the dark. Just my kind of party. They stepped off the lift, their boots echoing against the cold steel floor. The air was heavy and stale, filled with the faint tang of chemicals and decay. Jax's gloved hand hovered near the grip of his sidearm, ready to draw it in a heartbeat. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to find another way, but he shoved the thought aside. There was no turning back now. This way, Elena said, pointing toward a corridor that branched off to the right. The walls were lined with shattered glass panels and broken consoles, their screens cracked and lifeless. Above, a tangle of exposed wires hung like dead vines, sparking intermittently. As they moved deeper into the facility, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He wasn't the only one. Elena's eyes darted nervously from side to side, her finger hovering over the trigger of her rifle. Hutch, however, remained eerily quiet. Still no updates on those life signs? Jax asked the AI, his voice low. Negative. Hutch replied. The interference persists. However, movement has been detected approximately 50 meters ahead. Fantastic. Jax muttered. He turned to Elena, his voice a hushed growl. Stay close. If something jumps at you, you shoot first. Don't think, don't hesitate. Got it? She nodded, her face pale but determined. Got it. The corridor widened into a cavernous chamber, the walls curving upward into a domed ceiling. Rows of reinforced glass tubes lined the space, most shattered and empty, their contents spilled across the floor in grotesque, unidentifiable smears. The air was colder here, carrying a faint metallic tang that set Jax's teeth on edge. What were they doing down here? Elena murmured, her voice trembling as her eyes swept over the wreckage. She stopped in front of one of the intact tubes, her expression twisting in horror. Inside was a half-formed Krillolisk, its translucent skin revealing a mess of writhing organs. Its lifeless eyes stared blankly ahead, as if accusing the world of its grotesque existence. Your friends at OmniCorp sure know how to make a mess. Jax said grimly, his gaze flicking to the other tubes. This is worse than I thought. They weren't just breeding these things, they were experimenting with them. Tweaking them. Elena swallowed hard, her hands tightening around her rifle. They were creating weapons. Bioweapons. The Krillalisks were just the first generation. The data I stole, it showed they were working on hybrids. Creatures engineered to be smarter, deadlier. They wanted soldiers that couldn't be questioned, couldn't be stopped. Jax shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Of course they did. Why stop at regular monsters when you can build better ones? A sudden crash echoed from the far end of the chamber, cutting off their conversation. Both of them froze, weapons snapping up as their eyes locked on the source of the noise. A pile of debris shifted, and a low, guttural growl rumbled through the air. Hutch! Jax hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. What am I looking at? Analyzing. Life form detected. Genetic profile indicates Krillolisk DNA, but with significant deviations from standard specimens. "Fantastic," Jax muttered. "A hybrid. Just what we needed." The creature emerged from the shadows, its form grotesquely twisted. It stood taller than a standard Krillolisk, its limbs longer and more muscular. Razor-sharp spines jutted from its back, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence. It didn't rush them immediately, instead pacing slowly, almost as if sizing them up. "Jax," Elena whispered, her voice tight with fear. "What do we do?" "Same as always," he said, his tone grim. "We fight." The hybrid let out a deafening screech and charged, its claws scraping against the metal floor as it closed the distance with terrifying speed. Jax fired first, his rifle spitting a hail of bullets that peppered the creature's torso. It staggered but didn't stop, its momentum carrying it forward. Elena fired next, her shots more precise, targeting the creature's glowing eyes. One bullet struck true, and the hybrid let out a pained roar, veering to the side and crashing into a row of glass tubes. Shards exploded outward, and a foul-smelling fluid splattered across the floor. "Keep moving," Jax shouted, grabbing Elena's arm and pulling her toward a nearby doorway. "We can't take it head-on." They sprinted down another corridor, their boots slipping on the slick floor. The hybrid's roar echoed behind them, growing louder as it gave chase. Jax risked a glance over his shoulder and saw its glowing eyes cutting through the darkness, growing closer with every second. "Hutch!" he barked. "I need options. There is a containment room approximately 20 meters ahead." The AI replied. "If the door mechanisms are still functional, it could serve as a temporary barrier." "Temporary's better than nothing," Jax muttered. "Elena, you heard him. Run." They rounded a corner and spotted the reinforced door Hutch had mentioned. Jax reached it first, slamming his palm against the control panel. The mechanism groaned to life, the door sliding open just enough for them to slip through. "Inside," Jax ordered, shoving Elena forward. He followed close behind, his hand darting back to the panel to close the door. The hybrid roared again, its claws scraping against the wall as it barreled toward them. Come on," Jax muttered, his fingers dancing over the controls. The door slid shut just as the creature reached it, its massive claws slamming against the metal with a deafening clang. The impact reverberated through the room, but the door held, for now. Elena collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. "That thing, what was it?" "It's what happens when people play God," Jax replied, his voice grim. He turned to Hutch. "Tell me there's another way out of here." Analyzing. The AI's pause felt like an eternity. "There is a secondary access hatch in the ceiling. It leads to an adjacent corridor." Jax looked up, spotting a small hatch partially concealed by hanging cables. "Perfect," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A climb. Just what we needed." Elena pushed herself to her feet, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "What's the plan?" Jax slung his rifle over his shoulder and grabbed a length of cable from his belt. "We climb, we regroup, and we figure out our next move. Because if there's one of those things down here, there might be more." As the hybrid continued to batter the door, Jax tossed the cable over a beam and began his ascent. The cables groaned under Jax's weight as he hauled himself upward, his muscles screaming from the strain of the climb. Overhead, the access hatch loomed like a distant promise, faint beams of light flickering around its edges. "Keep moving," he said, his voice strained but commanding. we don't have time to. A thunderous crash interrupted him, followed by the shriek of tearing metal. Below, the reinforced door buckled inward with a sickening screech, its edges curling like wet paper under the relentless assault of the hybrid. Elena gasped, her hands trembling as she gripped the cable, eyes locked on the horrific scene beneath them. "It's not gonna hold," she shouted, panic bleeding into her voice. "I noticed." Jax snapped, redoubling his efforts. Hand over hand, he pushed upward through the pane, the hatch growing closer with each pull. "Hutch, how much time do we have before that thing turns us into a buffet?" "Based on its current rate of structural compromise," Hutch replied, his tone maddeningly clinical. "Approximately 22 seconds. "Great. Love the optimism," Jax muttered. He reached the hatch and slammed his fist against the release lever. It refused to budge. His heart pounded furiously as he glanced down. The hybrid dug its claws into the ruined door, twisting its monstrous frame to squeeze through the widening gap. Its glowing eyes seared into him, promising nothing short of annihilation. "Move, Jax!" Elena shouted. She was halfway up the cable now, her face pale but determined. "I'm working on it," Jax growled, yanking his combat knife from his belt. He wedged the blade between the frame and the edge of the hatch and gave it a brutal shove. The metal groaned under the force, then popped loose with a hiss of escaping air. Daylight, or what passed for it on Tartarus 9, poured in, painting the blood-soaked walls in a pale blue glow. "Go! Go!" Jax barked, reaching down to help Elena. She grabbed his outstretched hand, and together they scrambled through the opening just as the hybrid lunged. Its claws swiped through the air inches from Elena's boots, the force of the swing slamming into the wall with a deafening crash. Jax didn't wait to see if it would follow. Grabbing a nearby piece of debris, he jammed it into the hatch's mechanism and slammed the door shut. The sound of the creature's enraged roars echoed from the other side, followed by the rhythmic pounding of its body against the sealed barrier. "That won't hold it for long," Elena said, clutching her knees as she tried to catch her breath. Sweat dripped down her face, and her rifle dangled from its sling at her side. "We have to keep moving." Jax nodded, his own breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Agreed." "Hutch, which way?" "There is a maintenance corridor to your left. It should lead to a service elevator that can take you closer to the central launch hub." "Should doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, Hutch," Jax said, but he didn't argue. Gripping his rifle tightly, he motioned for Elena to follow and took off at a brisk pace. Their boots clanged against the grated floor, the sound unnervingly loud in the otherwise silent corridor. The air here was thicker, fouler, carrying the stench of decay and industrial chemicals. The walls were streaked with rust and grime, and flickering fluorescent lights cast erratic shadows that seemed to dance and writhe. Every movement felt exaggerated, every sound amplified, as if the very walls were conspiring against them. "So, what's the plan when we get to the hub?" Elena asked, her voice low but steady. "Please tell me it's more than just running and guns blazing." Jax glanced at her, his expression grim. "The plan is to survive. Beyond that? Improvise." "Improvise?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Fantastic. Nothing like a little spontaneity in the face of overwhelming odds." "Hey, it's worked so far." He offered a half-smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Besides, we've got Hutch. If anyone can find us an edge, it's him." "Your faith is touching," Hutch interjected dryly. "I'll do my best not to disappoint." The corridor opened into a larger space, a sprawling maintenance bay filled with rows of abandoned machinery and looming storage units. The air vibrated with a faint hum, the source of which Jax couldn't pinpoint. He raised a hand, signaling Elena to stop. His eyes scanned the room, every nerve on edge. "Something's not right," he murmured. As if on cue, the hum intensified, morphing into a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to pulse through their very bones. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into momentary darkness before stabilizing. When the glow returned, Jax's stomach dropped. They weren't alone. Dozens of red eyes blinked to life in the shadows, their faint glow illuminating the grotesque forms of more hybrids. These were smaller than the first, but no less menacing. Their bodies twisted and contorted, as if they'd been cobbled together from mismatched parts. Some had elongated limbs, others bristled with spines. All of them moved with an unnatural, predatory grace. "Ambush," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. "No kidding," Jax replied, leveling his rifle. His mind raced, calculating their odds and finding them bleak. Hutch, exit strategy. Now. There is an emergency override panel on the far side of the bay, Hutch said quickly. It can trigger a lockdown of this section, sealing these creatures inside. Perfect. Let's go. They moved as one, their footsteps light and deliberate. The hybrids didn't attack immediately, watching from the shadows like predators toying with their prey. Jax didn't know if it was intelligence or instinct that held them back, but he wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Halfway across the bay, one of the creatures let out an ear-splitting shriek. It charged, its limbs moving in a chaotic blur. The others followed, erupting from the darkness in a nightmarish wave. Contact! Jax shouted, opening fire. His rifle barked, the muzzle flash illuminating the chaos as bullets tore into the oncoming swarm. Elena was right beside him, her shots precise and deliberate. One hybrid went down, then another, but for every one that fell, two more took its place. Keep moving! Jax yelled. We're not gonna win this fight. They pushed forward, weaving between machinery and debris. The hybrids were relentless, their claws tearing through steel as easily as paper. One lunged at Elena, its jaws snapping inches from her face. She ducked and fired upward, the shot punching through its skull. It collapsed in a twitching heap, but there was no time to celebrate. Jax reached the override panel first, slamming his hand against the controls. The screen flared to life, displaying a series of options in garbled text. Hutch, I need you to. Already on it. The AI interrupted. The screen flickered, and the lockdown sequence initiated. Massive steel shutters began to descend from the ceiling, their edges sparking as they ground into place. The hybrids shrieked in protest, their advance growing more frenzied. Hurry! Elena urged, firing wildly to hold them back. Jax grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the nearest shutter. They dove beneath it just as it slammed shut, the echo reverberating through the corridor. On the other side, the hybrids howled in fury, their claws scraping against the impenetrable barrier. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of their labored breathing. Jax leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling as he fought to steady himself. Elena slumped beside him, her rifle clattering to the floor. That, she said between gasps, was too close. Yeah. Jax agreed, his voice hoarse. But we're alive. That's what matters. Hutch's voice crackled to life. The service elevator is approximately 100 meters ahead. I suggest you proceed quickly. There's no guarantee those barriers will hold indefinitely. Jax pushed off the wall, offering Elena a hand. You heard him. Let's finish this. They moved down the corridor, their steps heavy but determined. The air felt colder now, the weight of the planet's madness pressing down on them. Jax couldn't shake the feeling that they were nearing the end of something, not just the mission, but something deeper, something final. Jax, Elena said quietly, breaking the silence. Do you ever wonder, does any of this even matter? Fighting to survive, uncovering the truth, what's the point if it's all just going to get buried anyway? He didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the distant glow of the elevator. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but resolute. It matters because we're still here. Because as long as we're breathing, we have a chance to make it count. To make them pay. Maybe we can't stop all of this, but we can make sure that someone, somewhere, remembers what happened here. Elena nodded, her gaze steady. Then let's make them remember. Together, they stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut behind them with a quiet hiss. As the platform began its ascent, Jax felt the weight of the mission settling on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. Whatever waited at the top of the space elevator, whatever final gambit was left to play, they'd face it together. For better or worse, this was the endgame. The elevator hummed as it climbed, a steady vibration thrumming beneath their boots. The walls were streaked with soot and grime, and the faint scent of ozone lingered in the air. Jax leaned against the cold steel, his rifle cradled against his chest, while Elena stood across from him, arms crossed tightly as if bracing herself for the storm waiting above. Neither spoke, their silence heavy with the weight of their shared dread. The platform jolted slightly, and Elena shifted her weight, her eyes flicking to the control panel. How far up are we? She asked, her voice a thin thread of sound in the confined space. Not far. Hutch replied. Approximately 70 feet remaining. I've intercepted limited comm chatter from the Black Ops team. They seem to be regrouping near the central control console, preparing to defend the launch zone. Expect resistance. Jax exhaled sharply through his nose, his jaw tightening. Resistance is an understatement, Hutch. They've probably set up kill boxes all over the place. If we don't deal with the Hive Queen, we'll get shredded before we even step foot on the pod. Elena gave him a hard look, her eyes narrowing. And just how do you plan to deal with the Hive Queen? By feeding her dinner. Jax said, his voice grim but resolute. The mercs aren't just dug in, they're bait. Hutch can trigger the broadcast pulse from the comm tower, drive the swarm straight into their position. It's the only way we clear a path. Elena's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. And if it doesn't work? Then we're dead. Jax said bluntly. But we're dead anyway if we don't try. The elevator slowed, its grinding gears echoing in the shaft as the platform neared the top. Jax adjusted his rifle, the motion automatic, and glanced at Elena. You ready? As ready as I'll ever be. She replied, forcing a small, defiant smile. Let's make them remember, right? The platform shuddered to a halt, and the doors slid open with a hiss. Cool air rushed in, bringing with it the sharp tang of fuel and scorched metal. The launch zone sprawled before them, an industrial wasteland of towering scaffolds, flashing hazard lights, and the looming silhouette of the space elevator pod, an armored capsule perched on its massive docking clamps, its thrusters primed for liftoff. Spread across the launch area were Black Ops soldiers, moving with lethal precision as they fortified their positions. Automated turrets tracked the perimeter, their barrels sweeping methodically. Jax spotted the Comm tower rising from the far side of the zone, its antenna bristling with cables. It was their target, but reaching it would be anything but simple. Multiple hostiles, Hutch said, his voice clipped. Heavy weaponry confirmed. The turrets will make a direct approach impossible. Jax scanned the layout, his mind working fast. We'll use the maintenance tunnels beneath the launch pad. They'll get us close to the Comm tower without exposing ourselves. Hutch, can you get me a schematic? Already done, Hutch replied. A holographic map flickered to life on Jax's visor, outlining a route through the tunnels. Be advised, there are power conduits along the way. If the grid overloads, you'll be dealing with some unpleasant hazards. Noted. Let's move. They slipped into the shadows, keeping low as they navigated through the wreckage. The whine of machinery and distant chittering from the swarm filled the air, a constant reminder of the chaos brewing just outside the facility. At the entrance to the maintenance tunnels, Jax paused, his gaze scanning the darkness ahead. Hutch, any movement down there? Scans show minimal activity, the AI responded. Proceed with caution. Jax nodded and motioned for Elena to follow. They descended into the tunnels, their boots echoing softly against the metallic floor. The narrow passage twisted and turned, illuminated only by the faint glow of emergency lighting. Pipes groaned, and the occasional hiss of steam punctuated the oppressive stillness. As they moved deeper, the air grew heavier, tinged with the faint scent of decay. The walls were dotted with splashes of dried blood and deep claw marks gouged into the metal. Elena ran her fingers along one of the scars, her expression darkening. This place is a graveyard. More like a feeding ground, Jax muttered, his voice low. Stay sharp. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, a utility room filled with rows of humming generators and cables snaking across the floor. A dim light flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Jax crouched behind a console, scanning the area. Looks clear, he said after a moment. Let's keep. A sudden roar cut him off, reverberating through the chamber like a thunderclap. The ground shook, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Jax's rifle snapped up instinctively, his finger hovering over the trigger. Hutch? Elena asked, her voice tense. The AI's response was immediate. A large entity has entered the tunnel network. Based on size and seismic activity, it is likely the Hive Queen. Jax swore under his breath. She's hunting us. Elena's face paled, but her grip on her weapon tightened. How do we stop her? We don't, Jax said grimly. We outrun her. They bolted toward the far end of the chamber, weaving between machinery as the Hive Queen's roars grew louder. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the sound of splintering metal echoed through the tunnels. Jax risked a glance over his shoulder and froze. The Hive Queen was massive, a nightmarish amalgamation of chitinous armor and writhing appendages. Her eyes burned with a malevolent red light, and her mandibles dripped with viscous fluid that hissed as it hit the floor. Behind her, the swarm poured into the tunnel, a tide of gnashing jaws and clawed limbs. Hutch! Jax shouted, firing at the creatures closest to him. Redirect everything to the Comm tower. We need that pulse now. I'm already working on it, Hutch replied. But the broadcast frequency requires manual activation. You'll need to reach the tower yourself. Jax cursed again, his heart pounding as they sprinted toward the exit. The Hive Queen was gaining, her massive bulk tearing through the tunnel with explosive force. Debris rained down around them, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal. They burst out of the tunnels and into the launch zone, the sudden light stinging their eyes. The Black Ops soldiers turned, their weapons swiveling toward the new threat. For a moment, there was confusion, then chaos. The Hive Queen erupted from the tunnel, her massive form casting a shadow over the mercenaries. She let out a deafening screech, and the swarm surged forward, crashing into the defensive line like a tidal wave. The soldiers opened fire, their bullets ripping through the creatures with brutal efficiency, but the swarm was relentless. Jax didn't hesitate. Grabbing Elena's arm, he pulled her toward the comm tower, dodging stray bullets and the flailing limbs of dying hybrids. The battlefield was a maelstrom of violence, a cacophony of screams and gunfire. Bodies hit the ground in a gruesome symphony, mercenaries and monsters falling in equal measure. They reached the tower, and Jax slammed his hand against the access panel. The door slid open, and they rushed inside. The interior was cramped, filled with consoles and blinking lights. Jax's eyes locked onto the broadcast interface, a sleek control panel glowing with rows of data streams. "Hutch, tell me what to do," Jax said, his voice sharp. "Insert the data rod into the primary slot," the AI instructed. "Then activate the pulse by rotating the dial to maximum frequency."
Jax yanked the rod from his vest and jammed it into the slot. The console lit up, and the dial began to spin. He gripped it tightly, twisting it to its limit. A low hum filled the room, growing louder with each passing second.
"The pulse is charging,"
Hutch said.
You have 30 seconds until activation.
Elena's eyes darted toward the door as the sounds of battle grew closer.
"We don't have 30 seconds.
Hold them off," Jax said, his voice steady.
"We only get one shot at this." Elena nodded and took up a position near the entrance, her rifle trained on the chaos outside. She fired controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark. The swarm was surging, overwhelming the mercenaries and spilling further into the launch zone.
Jax gritted his teeth, his hand tightening on the dial. The hum reached a deafening pitch, and the console vibrated beneath his grip. 5 seconds.
Hutch said. 4, 3.
The Hive Queen turned her attention toward the comm tower, her massive form barreling through the carnage. Her red eyes locked onto Jax, and her mandibles spread wide in a chilling display of rage.
2, 1.
Jax slammed the dial forward, and the pulse erupted from the tower in a blinding wave of sound. The Hive Queen shrieked, her movements faltering as the swarm descended into chaos. The creatures turned on each other, their primal hunger unleashed by the pulse. The battlefield became a feeding frenzy, a gruesome spectacle of blood and carnage.
Jax grabbed Elena's arm. "Go! Now!" They sprinted toward the space elevator pod, weaving through the madness. The Hive Queen thrashed wildly, her screams echoing across the launch zone as her swarm tore itself apart. The remaining mercenaries, battered and broken, fell back, their defensive line crumbling. Jax and Elena reached the pod, and the doors slid open. They stumbled inside, and Jax slammed his fist against the launch controls. The clamps released, and the pod shuddered to life, its thrusters roaring. As the pod ascended, Jax leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. Elena slumped beside him, her face pale but determined. Below them, Tartarus 9 burned, its surface consumed by chaos.
Jax stared out the window, his expression hard.
"They'll pay for this,"
he said quietly. "OmniCorp will pay."
Elena nodded, her gaze steady. "We'll make sure they do."
Hutch's voice crackled to life.